Good morning, students. Today we'll clear the concept of speciation. Speciation is defined as the process of formation of new species in the course of evolution. This term was given by orator F. Cook in 1906. Species is a very important term in taxonomy. It deals with group of similar organisms which can interbreed and produce viable offspring. Speciation is the fundamental unit of evolution, and in eukaryotes, speciation, two important processes occur. Number one, genetic separation, that is, one gene pool splits into two. Phenotypic differentiation, that is, diversification of physical characteristics in the population. We have two types of speciation, natural speciation and artificial speciation. Natural speciation, which occurred naturally in the environment, in the natural conditions, and it is of four types, that is allopatric speciation, parapatric speciation, peripatric speciation and sympatric speciation. Whereas artificial speciation, it is achieved with the help of human influence, that is, by preventing either breeding by separating the population or intentionally breeding individual with desired or genotypic traits. First type, allopatric speciation. Allos means other, patra means fatherland. So in allopatric speciation, population initially becomes geographical isolated. Now geographical isolated means maybe there is a volcanic eruption, forest fire, climate change, urbanization, rural development, deforestation, construction of roads or railways, building water reservoirs, for example dams, right? So what happens, there is a geographical isolation. So species, they cannot cross the area. They can mate and produce the viable offspring, but they cannot do so because of the geographical isolation, right? So here what happens, the phenotypic and genotypic deviation is shown by the population which becomes isolated due to exposure to different selective pressures, differently occurring genetic drift in the isolated population, occurrence of different types of mutation. However, after a long period of geographical isolation, the population, when come in contact with each other, they become reproductive isolated. Initially, they are not reproductive isolated, but later on, after a long period of time, they become reproductive isolated, and there is no gene flow between them. These populations may undergo genetic diversion because of the natural selection. So very good example is Darwin finches. In the case of Darwin finches, they live in the Galapagos Island, which is far away from the mainland, and as a result of which they develop different types of beaks depending upon the requirement of food. Second is parapatric speciation. Para means beside, patric is space. Para, besides. So parapatric speciation occurs when two diverging populations of the same species are geographical isolated by extreme change in the habitat, but they have a narrow zone where their ranges overlap. This is very important. In this overlapping zone, these populations can develop distinguished lifestyles. So reproductive isolation tends to occur not due to geographical or habitat isolation. It is instead of due to adoption of different behavior suitable to distinct habitat and the prevailing condition. So parapatric speciation is a model that relates to continuously disturbed and changing population within a single connected habitat, right? So gene flow among these keeps on reducing due to the limited movement. This results in reduced fitness of the hybrid or the heterozygote, and strong selection pressure is exerted due to behavioral isolation that prevents their interbreeding. Example is Caucasian rock lizard. So we have got 3 species of these lizards. So these lizards, they are having strong hybridization between Daraviskia Potchinski and Daraviskia rudis, whereas very weak hybridization is shown between Daraviskia valentini and the other 2 species. Now, ring species of salamander. This is another example of parapatric speciation. Ring species of salamander. So, what happens? Salamanders, they are present along the geographical area, right? So, what happens? A ring species is a ring of population showing a range of intermediate forms between the 2 species. That is, as the habitat changes around the ring of population, what happens? Different species, they are formed. These species, they can interbreed with each other. Hybrids, they are formed. The hybrids, they are very important. They are not much viable, right? And as a result of which different species, they are formed. So in ring species, we can say that as we move further, the ring, the species which is present at the end, they will fail to mate with each other because now they are showing the reproductive isolation at the border areas, right? So in ring species, we can say that habitat is encircled by a ring of population. 2 distinct forms coexist without interbreeding at one location in the ring of population, hence forming different species. The trait of these species show gradual change through intermediate population into the trait of other species around the ring. Ring species demonstrate the gradual nature of species formation due to pressure of single species border marked by the reproductive isolation. In the ring species, individuals at the end of the cline are unable to reproduce when they come into contact. So this is an example of ring species, that is in salamander and Cetania. Next is parapatric speciation. Parapatric speciation, pari means surrounding, patric again means space. In parapatric speciation, a new species is formed in isolated smaller peripheral population that have become reproductively isolated from the main population and is totally prevented from the exchange of genes with the main population. The primary feature of parapatric speciation is the isolated peripheral population is much smaller than the main one, right? The second is the range of parapatric speciation are close and adjacent, but they do not overlap. Next, genetic drift, it plays a very important role. Climate change also plays important role. So partial isolation of Bolivian island around 3000 years ago forms large continuous forest habitat, causing the parapatric speciation. So what happens? We have got 2 types of chestnut-tailed ant birds. These 2 ant birds, that is southern chestnut-tailed ant bird and northern chestnut-tailed ant bird, they do not mate with each other. Why? Because there is a divergence in the song and certain allele frequency between these 2 populations, and as a result of which reproductive isolation is created and they form 2 different species. Last is sympatric speciation in the natural speciation. Sympatric speciation is the formation of 2 or more descendant species from a single ancestral species occupying the same geographical area. So sympatry occurs when the members of one population explore new ecological niche. Sympatric speciation is a result from sexual selection through change in the behavior, microhabitat, different breeding season, or the polyploidy. It is more common in plants than in animals, right? Now, very important is, in the case of sympatric speciation, 2 species, they cannot interbreed, right? The species must be a part of monophyletic group or the sister species. Now, a very good example is the hawthorn fly. and the apple fly. Now what happens? In the North America, there was hawthorn fly which lays its eggs on the hawthorn fruit. Hawthorn fruit is a small fruit, right? Apple was introduced in the 19th century. It is not the native species. The hawthorn fly, some of them, they preferred the apple fruit because it fruits early availability of fruit is there. Second is the size of fruit is very big. It can make a big tunnel, right? And those flies, hawthorn flies, which prefer apple fruit, they normally feed only on apple, not on the hawthorn fruit. And there is a shift, that is host shift from hawthorn to apple was there, which is the initial step towards the sympatric speciation. Now the apple maggot fly of same geographical region feed, mate on either the hawthorn fruit or the apple fruit. They do not mate with each other, and as a result of which, giving a good example of sympatric speciation. So here we are having all the three. Now how we can differentiate these four types of natural speciation, that is allopatric, peripatric, parapatric and sympatric. Now see, original population is same in all these cases. The initial step in allopatric is the barrier. There is a barrier which is developed, that is geographical isolation is there, and as a result of which two different species they are formed. In peripatric speciation, there is isolation but to a lesser extent, smaller extent, and as a result of which new species is isolated. In parapatric speciation, there is change in the environment, change in the, you can say, microenvironment, and as a result of which initially they are overlapping and later on they'll form a new species. And in sympatric, what happened? Within the same population, the ecological isolation may be there, the behavioral isolation may be there, the niche isolation may be there, and the two species, they are formed within the same area. So this is how we can differentiate all these four types of speciation. Now coming to a very good example, industrial melanism in the moth. This is a very good example which we can see that there is a speciation. Industrial revolution causes directional color change in the moth population because of the air pollution. We have got two types of moth. One is Biston betullaria and second is Biston carbonaria. What happens? Initially in 1848, only 2% dark population of this moth is present, but in 1895, 95% of the population is a dark population because of the air pollution. Then what happened when the air pollution was reduced, again Biston betullaria, that is the light color moth, they appear, right? So this type of melanism or the change in the two species is shown in the case of the moth. Now coming to artificial speciation. Artificial speciation is because of the human efforts, right? Either by preventing the breeding, by separating population, or intentionally breeding the individual of desired characters. So artificial speciation may also be induced in the animal husbandry, agriculture or laboratory experiments through induced polyploidy, hybridization or reproductive isolation. Good example is fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster. If it is given different food, if it is, you can say that the life cycle is developed on the different food items, they will develop into different fruit flies and they will be unable to breed due to the reproductive isolation because they grow in different environment in laboratories. This is another example of artificial selection, artificial speciation in the case of dogs because of the breeding, controlled breeding. That is different varieties of, you can say, races of dogs, they are formed because of speciation. Thank you.